Hello, Fern Creek class of 2020. I'm Mr. Tennyson, and I'm excited to be here with you for another money video in the Adulting 101 series. And this video is about freedom from work. Now, if you haven't watched the first video, the one about our perceptions on wealth, I highly recommend you go see that video first because we really want to have the right mindset when we go into this discussion about freedom from work. And I choose to say freedom from work rather than retirement, just because for you all right now as young folks, you are probably thinking that retirement seems like something that happens when you are old and you can't work anymore because you're so old, and you're like me, an old teacher, and you're just kind of hobbling around the place and you're ready to get out of there. That's not what it is. Freedom from work or retirement is really about being free to stop working when you want to because you've got enough money to do that. That's a lot different than just retiring at a set age because you're supposed to. As we discussed in the first video, a lot of Americans, they end up getting to that age and they're not really ready to be free from work. So, before we get started, what does it mean to be wealthy? Right? I want you to think about this question. And we discussed it last time about how our perceptions of wealth tend to get caught up in goods, possessions, or it definitely gets caught up in this idea of I need to have a very high income, right? I need to make some ridiculous salary in order to actually achieve wealth. And that's just not true. And that really was the focus of the first video. So if you haven't seen that video, check that out. The first thing I want to look at is this chart talking about the percentiles of earners in the United States. And I just want to make something really clear to you, right? You might have heard of the term like the top 1% of earners, right? It's almost become like a meme at this point, talking about the top 1%. The truth is that most people that are wealthy aren't even on this chart. They're not even in the top 10% of earners. But the thing is, a lot of you are going to be in the top 10% of earners at some point in your life, right? $118,000 a year, that's not that ridiculous of a salary in this day and age, especially for those of you that go into professions that are in high demand. But again, that's not really necessary. That's not what you need to be wealthy. You don't need to be in the top 10% of earners, but there's nothing wrong with it if you are. More power to you. So I want to talk about how wealthy people spend their money. Again, we sometimes think about wealthy people spending their money on new Porsches and things, but really, wealthy people spend their money on four things. They're all long-term essential goals, and they come down to this: freedom from debt, freedom from external control, and freedom from work, aka retirement, and lastly, sometimes, children's education. I think those are the four most common things that most wealthy people, legitimate wealthy people, will spend their money on. Now we'll talk about freedom from debt and freedom from external control, and really that comes down to having a good emergency fund. We're going to talk about that in another video about budgeting, but we're going to talk about freedom from work today. So I should say, before I continue, that it's not as though wealthy people don't spend their money on other stuff that they want, fun things, all that good stuff, right? For non-essential goals, wealthy people are going to spend money on whatever they want to within their means, as long as it's not negatively impacting what's essential to them. And that's those first four goals we talked about. Okay, so when it comes to preparing for this type of savings, when it comes to preparing for thinking about how do I get free from work, there's got to be three things in place before we really start to do this. The first is you have to have a deep understanding of your monthly income with a budget. There's no other way around it. You have to have a budget of some kind in order to get a good grasp on your money. Also, you have to have eliminated virtually all of your consumer debt. Hopefully, your consumer debt as a high school graduate is currently sitting at $0. I want you to keep it that way. So go check out Mr. Alara's credit card video on the Adulting 101 channel. Having a credit card is a great way to build credit as a young person, and having good credit is pretty important. On the other hand, credit cards can be an extremely treacherous way of getting yourself into crippling consumer debt. I think the average American has $10,000 in credit card debt, and that is not great. The last thing you have to have is you have to have an emergency fund. Now, when we talk about these three things, they're tedious and they can be a little boring sometimes. So I want to save them for another video because ultimately what this video is about is why it is absolutely necessary that you do these three things well. And I think it's a little more exciting maybe than these three things right here. Anyway, let's continue. So when I say freedom from work, I don't mean that you've gotten old and it's time to stop working. Freedom from work means you have enough money to have a reasonable lifestyle without a work-based income. A reasonable lifestyle is going to be different for different people, but most people, if they have been making, let's say, $65,000 a year for 40 years, they're not going to magically want to become a hermit when they retire. They might be able to afford to live on less, but it probably won't be drastically less. And let's not forget, they probably have grandchildren, maybe a spouse, maybe a parent to take care of. There's lots of questions that can come up as you get older. And I know right now you guys are young, you're 18 years old, the world is your oyster, but this sort of thinking can apply to when you are 28 or 35 or 45, all those ages as you get older, a little bit older, right? You're going to reach these milestones and you're going to want to do stuff. So freedom from work doesn't necessarily mean you've gotten old. I want to introduce you to a new concept, and that's compound interest. You may have heard of this before, but don't worry if you haven't. I'm going to try to break it down in plain English as best I can. At the top, there's this long technical explanation for compound interest, but I'm going to give you the plain English version right now. Compound interest is what accrues, I should say, on an initial deposit of money, where that deposit you've made earns some money just for sitting there in the bank. So a bank is going to pay you a little bit of money just for letting them keep your money. Then instead of withdrawing that extra money that you just got, you actually add it back to the original amount. And the next time that we get interest, it's a little bit bigger because now we're calculating the interest earned on that little bit of extra money plus our original amount. If you repeat this process enough times, you end up with lots of money. If you've never heard that term interest before, what you should know is that interest is basically just like a recurring fee that is paid for the privilege of borrowing money. Now, if you have a credit card and you use that credit card, you're borrowing money from the bank, usually with a very high interest rate, and basically the money is forcing you to pay them a little extra because you're borrowing money that you don't have. And that's cool, because when you invest your money with a financial institution, they are borrowing from you, so you get to earn interest on your investments as well. Now, I'm going to show you a few charts, and we're going to talk about what interest really looks like visually on a set amount of money. And so the first one I want to show you is just simple interest. Now, simple interest is pretty uncommon. You're not going to see it in a lot of places when you're banking, but anyway, it works like this. So you can see the math up there at the top if that interests you, but ultimately, if we invested $1,000 in an account that earns 7% simple interest each year, or you could say that you're just withdrawing the interest you earn every year. I mean, either way, it would work that way. Ultimately, you'd only have about $1,700 in 10 years just for letting it sit there. And, you know, if you think to yourself, well, hold on, I just earned $700 for nothing? Kind of, except you waited 10 years for it. And, I mean, that's a pretty long time, but hey, if you know you're going to need $1,700 and you don't want to have to spend that much at some time, you've got to take into account inflation and some other technical stuff, but sure, yeah, you could use this as a way of saving that amount of money, but it gets better. So here's that same investment with compound interest. One thing I want to point out is that with neither of these charts here, am I talking about contributing anything extra. We're just leaving money in the bank and it's earning interest. We're never actually adding to that money ourselves. We're just earning interest on that money. So what's cool is that with compound interest, as that interest compounds each year, is I'm making more interest on a higher balance each year, okay? I'm going to have nearly $2,000 in 10 years, again, just for letting it sit there, okay? And yeah, you're thinking, well, I mean, $1,700, $1,900, that's really not that big of a deal. But it is cool that it, this seems to make my money grow faster, right? Well, what if we added a little money every month, every year? If you invested $1,000 and you contributed $100 to that every month, or just put $1,200 in there every year, and if you earn 7% compound interest, 10 years later you'd have $18,000, right? That seems like a pretty good deal. What did you invest, right? So we invested $1,200 yearly. We had an initial $1,000 investment. So we only invested, what, $13,000, and we, got 18,000 or nearly 19,000, right? That's great. But that's only 10 years. I mean, you'd be 28 years old, presuming that you started this investment when you're 28 or when you're 18. But you've got a lot of time to let your money grow. 28's a very young age. What if we did it for 35 years? Well, you'd end up having about $170,000. You'd be 53 with nearly $200K just for lending out your money. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to work for that money, really. I mean, granted, you got to contribute $100 monthly. You got to work for that, but I mean, that's not a lot of work. Seems like a pretty good deal. Compound interest is the magical financial superpower that gives you the ability, with a pretty nominal investment, to really grow your money over the course of time. And you can see, hopefully, why it's really important that you start young as you can, and let that money really grow over time. Okay? But $176,000, even though that's great to have when you're 53, maybe you're 65 and that money has become something like, $300,000, whatever, that's not a lot, right? If you retire at 60, 65 years old, you presumably have 15 to 20 years of good life left in you to do stuff, take care of yourself, all those kind of things. And that's just not a ton of money. So the next thing I want to talk about is how we would go about thinking of our income as a vehicle for saving money, using compound interest, investing our money, and how we would go about doing that. And I think that this is going to really shatter your perspective on just how good, quote unquote, someone with that expensive appearing lifestyle actually has it. So here's someone with an expensive lifestyle, right? They spend 60% of their income, it's an expensive lifestyle. They're making $56,000 a year. And I think, I know I got that from a Bureau of Labor Statistics site for the average bachelor's degree salary is like $56K a year. Pretty reasonable, okay? Now, they're spending 60% or $33,000 a year, almost $34,000 a year on their needs. And people with expensive lifestyles, they usually end up having even more expensive needs than what they really need, right? We know that they're going to spend a lot on their wants, like these things that give them the appearance of wealth, fancy clothes or food, stuff like that. But they're also going to spend a lot, they're going to get tied up in really expensive things that they need, like a car just to get to work, right? They could be driving a Toyota Corolla. Instead, they're driving a BMW 3 Series. So their needs, the things they must have, end up costing them more than the normal person, or more than a person who's wise about their money. So they're spending 60% of their income on that, 35% of their income on wants, because, I mean, why not? We're living an expensive lifestyle. But our savings, that's an afterthought, right? We're making 56K a year. Maybe we just don't feel like we can save yet, and we're going to wait till we're making twice that before we really start to save. Okay. Here's someone with a wealth-oriented lifestyle. They're making the same amount of money. Now, 50% of their income goes to needs. That's totally reasonable. I mean, it's only 10% less, but this ends up making a difference. 30% of their income is going to wants. And I want to point out, it's not really a huge difference from the person with the expensive lifestyle. The difference is that this person has likely separated what their real needs are from what their pretend needs are. Okay, they've had this conversation with themselves, with their spouse, whatever, and they figured out this is what we actually need to function and do well. And here's some things that we want that will make our life more enjoyable. And they're saving 20% of their income. That's a priority for a wealthy lifestyle. A person with a wealthy lifestyle is going to save at a minimum 15% of their total income. And, in the higher end, 25% of their income or more. The more you save, the wealthier you are in the end. But that's a wealthy lifestyle. Now, this one I really like because here's a wealthy lifestyle, low-income person. Okay, they're making $35,000 a year. Their needs are going to consume more of their income, naturally, right? More of their income has to be spent on the things that they need. They get to spend 15%, so about half of what the 56K salary, right? They're spending about half of that on their wants, but that's still over $5,000 a year. And they're still saving 15% of their income. I wouldn't say it's the bare minimum. It's a good amount to save, but it's pretty much the minimum good amount to save, right? So that's a priority for someone with a wealthy lifestyle, regardless of their salary. Now, what I'm going to show you is the outcome of these decisions, the outcome of these lifestyles over time. The person with a wealthy lifestyle, assuming they start saving at 21 years old with that savings rate of $11,000 a year, when they're 56, they will have $1.7 million. The low-income person, only saving $5K a year, has accrued $750,000. But the one with the BMW, the one with the 4,000 square foot house, the one that eats out every night of the week at some fancy restaurant, saving a mere 5% of their salary, they've got $400,000 a year. Now, who's most likely at the age of 56 to be able to continue living a good life? Obviously, the person that's 56 that has 1.7 million sitting in the bank, that might not be enough to last them the next 30 years, really. They've got some ways to go for retirement, and that money is going to get even bigger. But honestly, if they wanted to live a little lower on the hog, so to speak, they probably could. It feels pretty good to know at 50 years old, if you don't want to work anymore, you don't have to. Whereas if you've been driving that 5 Series, 3 Series, or whatever, and you're living that in that expensive house, well, guess who is now enslaved to their job because they can't afford to quit? The person with the expensive lifestyle. Something to think about. So, I've talked a lot about why this matters, but I haven't talked about what you need to do. And I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you what you need to do. But I don't want you to overcomplicate it, okay? So here's the key takeaways for you. How do you make this happen? When you get your first job, more than likely, you're going to have the opportunity to get a 401k, a 457b, or a 403b account. These are all retirement accounts, okay? The very first day you're on your job, your first big career, you need to say, I want to max out my contribution for that, right? I want to send 6% of my paycheck, 10% of my paycheck, whatever it might be, to that account immediately. Day one, first paycheck, you should be contributing, okay? And most great employers are going to match some amount of that percentage, right? So you might put in 5%, they'll put in another 5%, and all of a sudden you're saving 10% of your income, right? And the cool thing is that you only have to work there for 4 years to basically get all that company's money. All right, no need to be loyal to a company for more than 4 years if you don't want to. But it does take some time to like what we call get fully vested. Okay, so just think about that. Right, you need to maximize that account from day one, and you also need to try to maximize a Roth IRA. Now, what are these things? Right, a lot of numbers getting thrown around here. Basically, those types of accounts are just different retirement accounts for different types of employees. Private companies get a 401k. People like me, teachers, we can use a 403b on top of our existing pension. Listen, if you want a job with a pension, you need to probably rewind the clock 20 years or something like that. I don't know. Those are pretty rare. 401ks are good to go. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on that, but you will probably be presented with one of these three options. So take advantage of it. And then a Roth IRA is just another type of retirement account. You can invest around $6,000 in it each year. It's tax deductible. As long as you're not making a really, really high income. At a certain income point, I can't recall what the number is, but you won't be able to contribute. Unless you are a pro athlete out of high school, then you're not making enough income for that one to matter. So you can go ahead and start contributing to that Roth IRA, and you should. The key thing with this, guys, is that you basically pretend that money never even existed in the first place. And I know that sucks, right? I know that you want to enjoy the money that you have earned after getting that college degree, and you're like, I gotta be doing this. As long as you're not in consumer debt, as long as you can reasonably pay for those student loans over time, you need to be investing your money as soon as possible. If you start in your 20s versus starting in your 30s, it's a substantial difference, and I can't tell you enough. Just start early. Okay. Why did I use 7% interest throughout this thing? Okay, so I want to dispel a myth that investing is complicated. There's a lot of portrayal of investing as this complicated Wall Street stock market madness thing. Don't worry about all that. When you go to make that retirement contribution at your employer to your plan, hopefully they're going to give you the option of choosing a target date fund. Hopefully it's a Vanguard fund. It's okay if it's not, but hopefully it is. Those are the best funds on the planet, pretty much. I'm not a Vanguard spokesman, so whatever. Anyway, choose a target date fund. It's literally going to say 2075 target date fund. That's the year theoretically that you're going to retire. Okay, throw your money in there. You're good to go. Otherwise, you can research what's called a 3-fund portfolio and lock yourself into that if your company doesn't make it super easy for you. But here's the thing. Both of these fund strategies, for most people, on average, over the decades, these funds return about 7%, which is great, okay? 7% is not ridiculous money, but it's enough. You've probably seen, maybe, hopefully, you've seen some news about the stock market crashing right now, all that kind of stuff because of the pandemic. Listen, all that stuff's horrible. We're about to enter a pretty bad recession, probably. But the truth of the matter is that over 60 or 70 years, it's really not going to matter from the perspective of earnings on really long-term money like this. Okay? On average, the market returns about 7% over 60 or 70 years. The last 60 or 70 years, that's what it's done. So trust that time and that data to help you make money without having to do a lot of work. Okay? Last thing is, don't be a Wall Street bettor. Okay? Don't pretend that you are an insider trader and that you have mystery information that no one else has, okay? You're not the Wolf of Wall Street, so don't get on Robinhood, don't get on some stock trading app and spend $20,000 buying a stock that you think is going to go up. That's a great way to be $40,000 in debt in the course of 24 hours, okay? So don't do it. Unless, of course, you go to be a quantitative financial specialist and you work at a company, I don't know, like 2 Sigma, then that will be your job and you'll be being paid to do that for all these dumb people that think they can actually outsmart the market. But the good news is you get paid to do that. Okay. Now, if you feel like you need more details, I want to reinforce the fact that if you maximize those retirement accounts and you prioritize saving in your budget, you're going to be better off than 75% of Americans. If you're saying, well, please give me more details, then I highly recommend you read The Boglehead's Guide to Investing. You can also check out their forum or the wiki at bogleheads.com.org, maybe. I can't remember. Great place with great people. They're all old and rich because they made smart decisions, and they're just a bunch of nice folks. Okay. All right. Last thing. What about YouTube? I like YouTube too. You're watching this on YouTube. In fact, becoming a teacher two years ago now has made me more interested in YouTube than ever before, just because all the students love it so much. And anyway, that's a tangent. There's probably a lot of good stuff out there. Okay. Here's the thing. If you find some complicated investment scheme and you have not yet invested in your retirement accounts, then you are wasting time and you're probably wasting money. Invest in your retirement accounts. They are guaranteed vehicles for you to earn money over time. It's that easy. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Last thing. Get rich quick schemes are most often make someone else rich and you become poor schemes. That's just the way it goes. Okay? Now if you're thinking, Mr. Tennyson, what you're telling me sounds too good to be true. Well, it is great. It's not amazing, right? We're earning some money over time. We're not becoming the top 1%. We're not becoming the top 0.1%. Nothing about what we're doing is unethical. We're simply taking advantage of the fact that we can earn compound interest on our money. And to be honest with you, the part that's not too good to be true is the very difficult reality of budgeting, having the discipline to do that, having the discipline not to buy everything that you want, not to attend every social function. There's sacrifice along the way. Lots of it. But it is certainly worth it. It is certainly worth it to be in control of your money and your life. Okay. Some closing thoughts for you. How can you achieve a well-balanced income? You don't even have an income yet, maybe. Well, it's important that you start those habits early, and we're going to talk about that in the budgeting video. Okay? You said something about retiring early. Well, hey, guess what? 56 years old is pretty early. But there's also this thing called the FIRE movement that stands for Financially Independent, Retire Early. And these are folks that are very frugal, typically with pretty high incomes, that have decided they don't want to work beyond the age of, let's say, 35. You can do that too. Again, you probably need to have a high income and you're going to be living a very austere life. But if you want to retire when you're 35, it's totally possible thanks to compound interest. And lastly, this all seems very intimidating. Absolutely it does. Guess what? You're just getting started. I really am just here to plant the seeds for these thoughts in your brain. I want you to remember, most importantly, the power of compound interest. I want you to remember that the person with the expensive lifestyle gets to live like a king for a little while, but when Judgment Day comes, it comes very hard. And I want you to remember that these accounts right here, your 401k or whatever it is, and your Roth IRA, those are the keys to this wealth over time. You need to do both as soon as you can. The younger you start, the better. Those are the three things I really want you to remember. So don't be intimidated by those three facts. Those three seeds will grow into a tree of wealth in your life, my friends. That's pretty much it for this video. Now that you've seen this, you hopefully will want to figure out how to create a well-balanced income. So I encourage you to check out the budgeting video. Until then, I'll see you next time.